Been looking at a lot of water plants and animals in a class we're working on, so some of that formally might be in my mind, and I think that's where first thoughts for the drawing today are. So we'll see where it goes. Nothing specific, just some kind of branching forms. First part of the exercise, the organizational part, will be kind of starting from the inside out, reaching towards something cohesive. And I'll begin with having a little play fun of these amorphous shapes or islands. Just something that has a bit of flex to its figure, not perfectly round or square or anything, but has bumps here, there, wide parts and narrow parts. Can be a little wobbly or smooth, up to you in the drawing. And we'll gather some of those figures in a loose aggregation where they may approach one another and then branch off on their own paths, having their own unique shapes, each one different but connected in some way to the whole by its proximity to the neighbors. And it's a chance to play and experiment with maybe little kinks or broad, smooth surfaces, small pieces fitting in between, or larger ones, giving more shape to that passageway between them. You start to get little canals in movement. And as we work on the larger exercise, perhaps having them gently move in a direction. And we'll see what comes from that play. And they may gather several instances of them and begin to distinguish groupings from each other. For instance, a grouping could slip behind or be separate. And to do that, we'll give them a bit of an outline. First, tracking along the edge, and then at times, perhaps leaving little branches grow outward to not necessarily give it a perfect border. Like a bit of coral or limbs, or starfish or something. And it can go on or off the page. It gives it a little inside shape and outside shape, whereas other things may pass in front or behind of that, growing in other directions. So we'll kind of work one by one and let them layer up, see how much time we have with it on the paper. And some little figures and forms, kind of like that, growing there. After we get a few established, we'll play giving them some definition, merging the inside and the outside lines to feel a texture and materiality to them. Starting from that kind of meditation on the texture that gives a resemblance to material, a texture that engages our more tactile senses, and spend a moment either holding the pen or pencil or letting the hand sit on the table or paper and noticing some of those more subtle textures around the weights, warmth or hardness of the materials you're engaging with. Let them move around a little bit, get familiar with your area, your workspace, engagement, surface, but also perhaps the area broader around, just to feel what the hands or arms can reach to. Noticing your connection with things, let the eyes close a little bit or be soft. And it's about how you make that interface through the hands. As we draw, we don't have necessarily that texture with us, so there is a subtle texture of the pen or pencil marking on the page, but we have the interpretation that our eyes know from learning from our hands. And so we'll look into that in the second half of the exercise. But to start, will get things forming on the page. And you could just take this organically, one bit at a time, or give it a little bit of guidance in your mind if you'd like to. Whichever works. We'll find a place to begin making that first little shape. Taking a couple breaths to steady the self and make sure you're seated or standing comfortably. And if you feel ready, begin that pen's journey. No defined direction or boundary. Wrapping from a starting point around some space, coming back, closing it off. This little island of shape, interior and exterior. As your eyes take in that first moment, setting the tone, the directionality of things, finding a place within its geometry, maybe a nice light bend or a tighter kink or fold, and letting that be the starting point for the next shape. Following a similar drawing pattern or formation, the first few getting our bearings, deciding orientation, directionality, each one building off the previous, based on where the eyes see some potential for connecting, for wrapping, shaping to a neighbor loosely as these forms gather and collect. Pen works. Switch over. And we can start to use our presence here to be pulled into that journey of the pen. Between each act of making the shape on the paper, letting the eyes take in the new proximities, the new curves and wraps, the new shapes, letting that guide where we might engage with the next motion, then preparing with a breath, and on the release of that breath, beginning the next little organic wandering. The shapes can start kind of light, just a movement around the end, the beginning, meeting as close as they can, but starting from that place of observing, then exhaling out a space of action. Going slow for a few rounds, letting the pace pick up as we integrate with the connection between our eyes, seeing and the shapes making to the hand. Breathing in at the place of engagement and exhaling through the action of motion. And things could start to branch a little, diverge out in different directions, up, down, left, right, any of them open to us, with no outer figure. It's just the space between things and the inhalation and exhalation forming new figures on the paper. Use the next few shapes to really fill out our lungs, fill out the space of the body and torso, and expand, giving us that time to take in space between things within the drawing, and then on the release into relaxation and movement and play around with the pen, pencil. Breathing at a pace that's comfortable for you, inhaling and releasing through the motion. Noticing sometimes the mind wants to jump right into the next place, the eye seeing opportunity, learning the field, learning the way to map the territory, and giving it a little time, a little space there within the breath. Relax and wait for what it sees coming, not to dive in too quickly. Take one or two more full inhalations with observation and exhalations with marking out. And then we'll begin to give this collection of spots, this figure, a bit of an outline shape to give it presence. Empty page. I think as mine reaches towards the edges, I'll let the shape come in from outside and maybe lead off inside. A continuation, just a snapshot framed here. But feel free to make a floating shape, isolated, or any other thing that the relationship of your objects to the edge of the paper bring to you. I'm going to start moving along some edges, going pretty slow, a little slower than feels natural. Perhaps when the pen has to make a turn to track an edge, there's an opportunity to branch out a little bit, a finger reaching out into space and then coming back to track along the edge, an indentation causing a little bit of disturbance to the line that lets it meander out for a moment. The tip or ending of something, an opportunity to reach just a little out into space before being pulled back in. The moving slowly, giving the eye time to see those little moments, to build a narrative, and providing a nice place of release when we start to move a little quicker, free from the tracking along. And some things may reach far and search through the emptiness of the space around in a branching coral structure. Others may just be little bumps or nubs suggesting future expansion and growth. Letting that slow movement give space to the imagination, the hand learning through the eyes, tracking the shapes and figures, the bends and the curves of the lines related to their genitor, the starting forms taking shape there. A little oscillation between slow working along and fast playing out. With one complete figure taking space on the page, we want to take some time to add some others sneaking by in the background, we move a little quicker, we have a sense of the shapes forming there, a sense of the aggregation giving directionality a little bit. The eye and hand work together to make figures in that space behind, building up a little bit more of a world from the visual language we've established. Just some shapes gathering together, filling in a little bit of the connection between them, and then taking their own journeys. Keeping mind of what is in front, what is behind. And to see a bit of the space, perhaps, in your mind. Notice where something was, disappears, and returns. Imagine things that we can't see directly to fill out some space. And as we work through this, a little play and flexibility, free time to work at your own speed. So whenever you feel a collection form something, and come back in and begin to add again the branching outline that holds it there as a thing on the page. Letting the opportunities overlap, slipping behind, reaching in front. Feed that imagination of the space on the paper. A living, growing thing. Maybe one or two more. A little bigger, a little smaller. Now that we have a sense of what we're constructing, the foreground and background taking shape, having a little bit play and movement, creativity within a system, reaching out towards the emptiness. Enjoying a little bit of time absorbed by the emerging forms on the page. A little world taking shape. Perhaps little creatures, plants, animals, their own little story, that branch reaching then avoiding, slipping its way behind. Nice flowing geometry out into the space. And now as we transition and continue to add more, to fill out some more of the page, keeping the layers going, there's more and more to the background. It can get dense and complex. I think I'll begin an exploration on the primary, the front foreground form, to give a little bit of shape to that in-between space, To keep it simple in the technique, a nice repetitive tracking moment, working around the edges and just lightly drawing them in, reaching from out towards the empty space between, or reaching from in towards the empty space between, depending on which comes first or second. They may align, intersect, cross over, or try to avoid each other. I'm going to leave a little room between them and use that to tie it all together. But first, just a tracking along, some moments of absorption in the drawing, some moments of noticing relationships across that empty territory between islands and boundary. Just draw for a few minutes in quiet. We might think within so much potential repetition that could become a guide for the rhythms of the body. It's a good chance to test, to observe. Are you breathing? In the background, does the evenness of pacing of output correspond to that evenness of pacing internally? It'd be easy to hold something in, to be absorbed by the one action, that expression on the page. And while our automatic systems take over a little bit, they become a subordinate to our absorption. So noticing as you keep the pen or pencil moving, quick, repetitive motions, that as much as they can draw in, they can fade back. We become good at them, used to them. You can observe the other things of the mind-body connection happening in that space. Observe the pacing of inhalation and exhalation, fast or slow, even or irregular, just what it is, a state you settle into while working out into that medium of the drawing. And as we notice it, we can't help but give it some guidance. We might feel it's happening a little quickly, the quickness of my movement, quickening and shortening my breath, and I want a little more inhalation. We start to slow it down, we start to adjust it, or we notice I'm breathing very slowly, intermittently, when cued by the body internally. Remember, breathe. We want to even it out a little bit as we notice something, think about it, begin to act on it. That's okay. We notice the noticing, we notice the reaction or the action, prompted perhaps a little by intuition, perhaps a little by an anxiety. Is this the right way? And as we layer the separation of noticing, it gradually returns to what is needed, reabsorbed by action in the present moment, whichever you choose to be the focus, the act of breathing, the act of marking, the act of observing the page, developing your interface into a mindful connection between the body, the space around, and a medium of expressing out. And there are a lot of lines here. Slowly, through commitment, repetition of action, they take shape, they get more definition, the texture grows along the edges. Things may appear more volumetric or three-dimensional, just material in the nature of having variation, complexity, as most things do. As you approach the end of the formal exercise, perhaps you see opportunity to layer in more detail and complexity to keep that engagement going. If you have the time and the stamina of engagement, keeping your mind present, maybe feel free to keep on drawing. Because you may also become tired. We notice that as well. Or become overworked in the hands or fingers or something. And it can hurt to take a step back, to take some breaths, take a break, and decide if we come back to it at another time. Continue to grow within the world formed. Wherever you're at with your marks, with your movement and action, take a few deep breaths, noticing them. Pen can keep moving or go down onto the page. But the breath fills out a little bit more, presses the body into the clothing, presses the body into the chair or space around us. As the body becomes re-aware of what's around it, we move a little bit in our seat, move a little bit on our feet. We'll move a little bit at the shoulders or the spine. As everything kind of wakes back up with the reintegration of breath. We let the eyes reopen to the world around us. Whether they were closed or open, they look around, they take something new in, they refocus far and near, outside of the paper space. And let you make that choice to follow the path back out into the rest of your day or dive back into something in front of you.